Kyle, come on, why are you in the magma again? Seriously. Oh man. Hello to all the meeps and bubbles and welcome back. Ever heard of a petroleum boiler? Wanna see me fail at that? No, honestly, it works fine, but the temperature's not what I wanted. But before we get to that point, let's rewind a little bit. We ended the last episode with our magma-powered steam turbine setup. And because my friend Meng had the idea to use our magma heat source on both sides, I want to use the magma power on the left vanilla side for a petroleum boiler. In order to not lose any of our magma, I'm gonna dig it up first. By the way, this is where Kyle got hurt. And then I will store it with the help of our glitch pump in our 1-tile storage. Well, it is actually 2 tiles right now, and you can imagine that we have a lot of magma in there. And I think you can also imagine that this took a while. Meanwhile, on the second planetoid, Wade's planet, I had time to rearrange our rocket platform. Why that? Because it was partly blocking 2 of our solar panels. Now let's send this off and give it a new home. There we go, now we just have to get rid of the remnants. Hey, and while we are here, why not give this planet more solar energy? Admittedly, this planet doesn't have the best power grid at the moment and is always in need of a little bit more extra energy. I absolutely like solar power for planets with a low energy consumption, especially since we get so much free glass from our first planetoid. But this planetoid here is very power hungry. For example, take a look at our Swampy armada here to the right. This recording here is from a few cycles in the future, where I cleaned up some old buildings that are not used anymore. Speaking of cleanup, I couldn't look at all these unused materials down here anymore, so I ordered the duplicants to get rid of them, or dig them up. A few more things happened on this planetoid before we can go back to creating the petroleum boiler. This metal refinery, for example, used a bug a few episodes ago. The bug being infinitely storing overheated water inside of this metal refinery, instead of just dumping it somewhere. Meaning this building is full to the brim with overheated water. I guess at the moment we have around 80 tons inside of it. Let's quickly check that. Around 3,400 kilograms per tile. And we have 19 tiles. The water one doesn't count. So around 64 tons. Me being me, I started building before thinking or even checking the buildings. Meaning of course the steam is not hot enough to power a steam turbine. It only was at around 104 degrees Celsius. So right now you can see me trying to compress the steam into a smaller area. I'm totally aware that this will later on break the tiles and spill the water everywhere, but that is pretty much the plan. Here for example is a recording from the next episode. The steam turned into water, 5.5 tons per tile, and is slowly destroying the walls surrounding it. We can speed this up by deconstructing a wall tile, or maybe 2, and then have the water flow down everywhere. Wait, if I see that correctly, yes, we got Adrian trapped again. Nothing that a little freefall couldn't solve. Further down on the same planet, I excavated a little bit to make room for future steam usage. To the right of the excavation deconstructed a few buildings that weren't needed anymore. And then, well, I thought while we're at it, why not just get rid of everything? Which admittedly wasn't the worst idea because of all the water that will spill from our metal refinery compression. And now back to the main planetoid that we finally managed to cool down a little bit with the help of spaghetti pipes. Just a slight issue here. The magma solidified. Honestly, not a big deal though, because all the heat energy is still in there. The only thing that changed is that we cannot refill it now. We would need another tile to add more liquid magma to it, which is probably just not worth it. To start the boiler, I will first implement the heat transfer setup, which is a fancy way of saying place down a steel door and some thermally conductive tiles. After that we can build the heat exchanger, which is basically just some insulation tiles in a snake pattern. The larger area here is where the crude oil will be boiled into petroleum. Then we will follow this up with a couple of floors in the snake pattern, maybe make the boiling chamber a little bit bigger and add even more floors. You will need more or less floors depending on the material for the piping that you use. In our case I will be using what we have and we don't have anything. I could make a placeholder piping, but I would have to remove that again later. I don't want that. So we will need to wait for material from the second planetoid. The cooked petroleum will drip down every floor and end up in this tiny pocket right here, where we will suck it up with a hydrosensor controlled steel pump. The temperature of the crude oil and petroleum that will drop down into this boiling area will need to be controlled very precise, which is why I'm hooking up this door to power. Otherwise, the closing sequence would be too slow. I deliberately made those floors 2 tiles high so that the duplicants can walk in them. And remember, any liquid or gases that are in contact with the space tiles will cease to exist. That is why you see me using drywall to cover up the space tiles. Then I went a little bit overboard and placed them in places where you don't necessarily want or need them. But while we were doing that, we accumulated enough copper to place down our radiant liquid pipes. The heat input into our boiling chamber is controlled by this door. So let's first place down the cable and then automate it with the help of temperature sensors, which we don't have material for, again. But the dupes on Wade's planet are working on sending some over. While we are here, we got lucky. Check out all those paku. Why do I even care about those paku? We have enough food. Well, every single one of our patrons could state some wishes, and Wade wanted a fish tank in the bedroom. That is why I'm glad that I can finally try to fulfill that. All we need to do now is get those slippery fish into our aquarium, which is easier said than done because they dropped all the way down, all the way down to our base. I first tried a trick where you place down a critter drop off to wrangle excess critter, but this did not work. So I'm wasting a little bit of plastic and try using the fish trap for once. The fish trap has finally been built and already burnt down. Second try in another part of the base where the parkour also dropped down. Since I'm pretty sure it is the crude oil that is messing with the parkour, I'm trying it in this water tile here. And a short wait later, it actually worked. The only thing our Adrian needs to do now is get that parkour and transport it all the way throughout the base without dropping it. Which would honestly be a first if they don't screw up. But so far everything looks good, the parkour is being dropped. And now we have the first double camera. And now we have the first of many parkour in this aquarium. And the next parkours are right up ready for delivery. Maybe a little bit bugged out though. The 2 parkour already decided to lay some alternative eggs. By the way, wait, if I finally find an arbor acorn, you will get your arbor tree. And here are the tropical parkour. And now back to the petroleum boiler. Oh come on, you're still not done? Can't change that for now, so let's prepare the piping. This will be the output for the petroleum. And down here will come the input for the crude oil. I will cut and rearrange the piping later on. And this pipe here will be the input for the crude oil. You see me trying to find a spot to place down the pipes. But as I said, it is pretty easy to switch that around later on. At least we should finally have the materials to place down our 2 thermosensors. And maybe we can add a temp shift plate for better heat transfer. By the way, that is totally a thing that I dislike about drywall. You can't just build over it. Why, Clay? Why? Here I moved the temp shift plates a little. And then, now that this is finally closed off, we can set the temperature for the temperature sensors that will control the door. Crude oil turns into petroleum at around 400 degrees Celsius. But depending on the heat capacity of your different materials, a lot of heat can be saved inside of the metals or background tiles. So this part may need a lot of tuning. In the next episode, you'll see me reducing the threshold to around 399 degrees Celsius. The crude oil that turned into petroleum will flow down this snake piping, get sucked up by this pump and be transported to its designation. The crude oil that will counterflow the outcoming petroleum will come from our infinite storage. For now, I will change that up later. But for now, let's just try this. When filling a petroleum boiler, it is always a good idea to start with a small amount first. That means we can activate our doors now by setting the thermosensor from below to above, then wait for the crude oil to turn into petroleum and add even more crude oil to the batch. Rinse and repeat until the chamber is filled. Something that could happen though is, if your materials are overheated, your crude oil will turn into sour gas immediately. Which is no problem though, because we left some of the tiles exposed to space, so the gas will just cease to exist. And once the boiling area is properly filled, the petroleum will counterflow the incoming crude oil, heating the crude oil up in the process and cooling itself down, which is a very important mechanic and makes this as power efficient as it is. The incoming crude oil will almost be heated up to the point that it will turn into petroleum. We just need a tiny bit of extra energy for that. And the downflowing petroleum will be cooled down by the incoming crude oil, making it easier to process for later use. As I already said, at the moment the crude oil comes from our infinite storage, but later on I want to hook up our oil pumps on the second planetoid directly to the teleporter unit, transporting the stuff over to the main directly into the boiler. Something that happens a lot, especially if you don't have a constant stream of 10 kilograms of crude oil. Pipes may break. A lot. This has to do with the fine tuning I was talking about, and there are several things that you can try to fix that. You can only use one metal tile, change the material of the tile, door or temp shift plate. You can change the settings of the thermosensors, Try to have a constant stream of 10 kilograms of crude oil that helps with cooling. Change out some radiant pipes for normal pipes. Or you can remove background tiles in unnecessary places because they act like a heat buffer. By the way, for now, all of our produced petroleum is stored in those liquid reservoirs. Oh yeah, and remember our unhappy water producing Halo? He is pretty stressed at the moment, which is why I'm countering that by erasing all of his skills. This hopefully should help keeping his morale in check. Hey, at least he seems happier now. Halo even spends his free time in the hydrogen-infested dancing area. Weirdly just standing around though. I guess that means back to work for you and more free water for the rest of the base. Man, I love this exploit. I mean, just look at all the pea water that we are producing and that I'm using to power our oil wells, which probably should get a little bit of automation. There we go. Just a quick check on weight while we are here, and of course on his parkour, which are just tropical parkour now. Okay, the entire energy production on the main planetoid, as well as the petroleum boiler, is heat based. And the entire heat is coming from those two tiles right here. So let's check how much material we still have. Around 168 tons at 1200 degrees Celsius. And the second tile has 481 tons at around 1300 degrees Celsius. Speaking of heat, this is how the first planetoid looks at the moment. The second planetoid is also interesting. And the third one is still pretty cold. Jumping back to Wade's planet, we do have a lot of oil wells, 4 to be exact, and I'm planning on using all of them in the next episode. Our Swampy army right here supplied the base with around 4 million calories, but this area is quite hot and maybe needs cooling soon. On the main, we're at 1.4 million calories. On another note, Steakooo wasn't stopping to rage, so I had to skill scrub them as well. While we are here on Steakoo's planet, why not check out our metal volcano Tamer? Because our aluminum volcano is finally erupting. And as you already told me guys, of course the pressure in the room is too high for the volcano to erupt properly. Which means that I'm solving this problem in a rudimentary fashion by just deconstructing an insulation tile, letting the steam out, waiting a little bit and then quickly reconstructing the insulation tile. Now the volcano can properly erupt. As soon as the heat in the steam chambers rises enough to power our steam turbines, the auto sweepers will kick in, pick up the aluminum and place it in a conveyor loader, which will then transport it through our snake piping, or it will not, because I forgot to give it a direction. So we can quickly add another conveyor bridge to solve that. So let's check this again. The aluminum should now cycle around until it is cool enough for the conveyor thermosensor to tell the shutoff to open. The aluminum can then leave the system and drop through the chute. But at the moment the aluminum is still too hot, it is at 380 degrees Celsius. So it needs to cycle around more, give off its heat and will then be dropped later. Which I apparently will not be able to record in my lifetime. Today is gonna be a shorter episode because I have a nice interconnected setup planned for the next episode. As well as a lot of smaller stuff. And because I cut around 5 hours of cleaning, excavating, magma handling and problem solving from this episode. But I will not forget about today's only creator shoutout. This one goes to Too Legit City, who's creating all of the tutorials that I'm not getting done since last year. So check him out for some thorough information on most of the topics. Leave a like for the algorithm. Thank you all for watching and I see you in the next one.